chime in. And you're all, with the exception of Sean, who is probably the newest in ministry, a year and a half, but a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience with life experience and experience in the church. So none of us are beginners here. I think there's a collective wisdom, and I would hope and pray that some of you will be coaching. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Overseed and how we go about this, because there's such a huge need today for veteran pastors to be coaching other pastors. So anyway, let me tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in Massachusetts, just south of Boston, and came to Christ when I was 16, had to leave the Congregational Church. Our church was a UCC church at that time, still is. It's barely hanging on, but it's still there. And but I had to leave the church to find Christ. I came to the Lord at 16 through a youth ministry. And then when I was 20, went to a local college, Eastern Nazarene College in Quincy. And when I was 20 years old, my junior year, my senior year, I sensed that God was calling me into the ministry. And to be honest with you, it was the last thing I wanted to do. I'd only really been a believer for about 4 years. We're still trying to figure this whole thing out. And it was right during the height of the Vietnam War. And they had a draft lottery. Some of you guys are old enough to remember that. And I had a low number. My draft board kept calling me and saying, if you drop out of college, we're going to draft you. And I didn't want to go to seminary. And during that time, and Steve, you may remember this, there were people going to seminary to get out of going into the draft. I was sort of the opposite. I would have rather gone into the military than gone to seminary. I mean, I was dragged. It sounds funny, doesn't it? But I was prepared to join the Navy, and my father was a Navy man. But God said, no, you're going to go to seminary. And so I did. And even then I was fighting it. When I graduated, I took the 5-year plan. Some of you maybe took the 3-year plan. I took 5 years to, I jokingly say my wife, she is smart, but she graduated from UMO, summa cum laude, National Honor Society, Phi Beta Kappa. And so I say, some people graduate, magna cum laude, some people graduate summa cum laude. I graduated laude, how come? Have you heard that joke? That's good if you ever do it. If you ever do it. Back in Oregon or something. Hey, yeah.
Save that.
Huh? What's that?
Save that.
Save that. Okay. And I mean, that was sort of true. It wasn't that I was stupid, but I was very easily distracted, but managed to get through seminary in 5 years. And then went and earned a degree in counseling, because again, I was dodging the pastorate. I did not want to go into the pastorate. I had no good experience in my church under my pastor. He was a dear man, but I don't think he ever knew the Lord, and I didn't find Christ there. So I was doing youth ministry full time. My wife and I were really enjoying that in Western Massachusetts. And then when I was 29 years old, the draft board called in the form of God and said, I want you in the ministry. And it was a time of great surrender. I mean, I surrendered with weeping and tears. And after that moment of surrender, there was peace. 2 weeks later, a church in Andover, Massachusetts called me. And they got my name through both the UCC and Gordon Conwell. And Free Christian Church of Andover. It was an older church. The numbers were down. They talked about closing their doors. There'd been a huge fight, which I never knew about. Some things it's probably best you don't know. And God called me there. I stayed 35 years, and it was, I would not trade any of that for the world. I have a daughter who's a counselor, and man, it is hard work. I would no more want to be, a psychotherapist than digging ditches, you name it. God is faithful. He knows us. He knows our call. There were many, many times during that 35 years where I had those Jacob moments where I say, God, I can't do this. If you don't bless me, if you don't help me in this moment, I don't know what to do. I'm really lost. I'm really struggling here to see something happen. And often it was at those moments that God did, and He showed His faithfulness and reaffirmed my call. So that's kind of, and then 10 years ago we moved to Maine, where we had a vacation home. It was our only home. We lived up Parsons all those years, but built a house there, and we moved up there. And I'm working for Overseed very briefly, and some of you are familiar with it. Blake is, I don't know if you are at all.
From presentations at Gordon Conwell.
Okay,
when I was there,
oh,
was
good,
encouraged.
Steve, Jim Harrell, yeah. Jim started it in 2008. And basically, we're focused on New England only, and the idea of overseed is in the springtime, you gotta overseed your lawn. You don't have to replant the whole thing. You don't have to plant the whole new lawn, but you have to do a little bit of replanting. And so to distinguish between planting, we talk about replanting. We're working with existing churches, you guys are all in helping, we don't really, find pastors, not a placement service. But when a pastor goes into one of those churches, we can connect with them and support them in this, because as you guys all know, you folks all know, revitalization is hard. Planting is hard. You talk to planters and they'll tell you this is not easy. Well, we do replanting, and it's also not easy. It's hard work. So, but that's what we focus on, and the way we do it is with regional coaches. Blake was actually coaching with us until COVID hit, and maybe at some point get that back on track, because these younger guys need veterans who will come alongside them, pray with them, encourage them, gather them into a group so that there's peer coaching as well. And Sean is in the group that I coach. We actually have about 20 groups now. They're all the way from Millinocket. Some of you know Ian Shearer. He's up in Millinocket, and he's leading a cohort up there, all the way down to the New York suburbs of Connecticut. And about 20, one in Rhode Island, about 5 in Maine, 4 or 5 in Massachusetts, 3 or 4 in New Hampshire, Connecticut. So anyway, we're working with about 120 pastors through these cohorts. And I just oversee Maine and my own cohort, and also this one in Brunswick, this one mentioned Millinocket, this one in Waterville, and there's one in Saco, and there was one in Kittery. It moved over the line into New Hampshire now, and it's in Portsmouth. Anyway, that's what we're doing, and I love the focus. There's all kinds of groups. There's many groups are in right now. Pastor support groups are very in cohorts. And there's all different ones as part of this groups. There's, obviously denominational ones. Gordon Conwell is doing these resiliency, I think, with the Lilly Foundation grant. And, but ours are really intentional. We are focused on helping pastors revitalize their churches and guiding them through that process. And that's what it's about. We gather once a month for 2 to 3 hours. Some groups are 3 hours is 2, although I think it would be better if we went to 3, because we always run out of time to pray. We spend a little bit of time in the Word, then pray. And then we've been working our way through different books. We actually have a 5-year curriculum that Jim Harrell has been developing. The first year, we use this book, which is a good one, Church Planting is for Wimps. That is a great primer for, if there's a young pastor like Jacob, probably ought to read it. If you're working with a young pastor, that's a good book. He writes well. And then this book, the guy who wrote this, I don't know who he is, he's a nobody, but it's a good book. And that's kind of the first year where you're really helping younger guys get established in the role of pastor and how to work in a revitalized, in a church that needs to be revitalized, renewed. Second year, we might do this one, Dangerous Calling, which is a good book, but a hard book. Very reflective and internal, and kind of makes us realize we got a lot of problems as pastors. He has a way of drilling down into your soul. Paul David Tripp. We also, second year, we'll do this one, which is a really good book, written by a Lutheran, retired Lutheran pastor. Really gets to the heart of the pastoral identity, how we see ourselves as shepherds. And excellent book. We did that 2 years ago. last year, the third year, we did this book, Organic Reformation, which is all about discipleship. Anybody familiar with this? Okay, this is Tom Johnston down in New Hampshire with the, what's the name of his organization? Praxis, yeah. A church planting. That's what they focus on. But this really is talking about making discipleship really the culture of your church. And I think Blake is probably our poster child here for that. I think you, what I know of your ministry here, you really have made producing disciples the goal of your church. You know, they talk about the ABCs of churches. We focus on the ABCs: attendance, buildings, cash, right? We leave out the D, discipleship. So ABCD. And then this year, the fourth year, that my group is, and you can, groups vary around a lot, but what they do, it's not a strict curriculum. But this is a good book on leadership development. Easy read. We had a good discussion about it on the way down. Yeah. The way up, rather. Mac Lake is the author. He basically makes the point that every church has all the leaders it needs. They're just not developed. And they're sitting out there. People who lead businesses, lead their families, lead maybe in the military, all kinds of leadership experience and understanding. But we haven't figured out a way to really help them translate that into either leading in the church or leading for Christ in the community where they work. And he makes the point that often we have approached the whole gift theology about in leadership development about how does it help the church? We have all these gaps in our church. How can we fill the gaps? But he turns it around and says, if you read the scriptures, it wasn't about helping people find their gift to fill a spot in the church. It was helping people find the gift that God had given them and called them to. What is their calling? Why are they gifted in the way they are? Help them discover that, because that's where God's going to use them. That's where their passion is. That's what they're excited about. So rather than what's in it for us as a church, it's really what's in it for the kingdom. And some of the people you develop may go and use their gift elsewhere, but that's okay if it's for the kingdom. So it's really a kind of a refreshing way to look at it. And he talks about developing a culture. So that's kind of what we're reading. And I do have 3 copies of my book left. I mean, there's plenty more where these came from, but if anybody wants one, they're $12, which is my cost. You can also get a used one online for a lot less than that. So, but it's a good read if you're working with a younger pastor, or who's, how long you've been there, 5 years? It might still be useful for you. Yeah. So, anyway, let me do a little devotional. Take you to a passage in 1 Kings 19 that I think is a good passage for the times that we are in. And would somebody want to read for us? Read chapter 19 from verse 1 to verse 18. 18 verses. Who likes to read publicly? None of you guys like to do that, do you? Hi.
I'll read.
All right.
Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he rose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my father's." And he lay down and slept under the broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And Elijah heard it, and he wrapped his face in a cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice and said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I, only am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu, son of Nimshi, and you shall anoint to the king over Israel, and Elijah, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meloha, and you will anoint to be a prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him."
Thank you. You read well. Does he read for you on Sunday mornings?
We voted him permanent reader.
I bet he reads better than this guy over here.
I was looking at that.
Well done.
Sorry about
How's he
those.
gonna do that?
Sorry about those Old Testament names.
Yeah.
They always throw us, don't they?
I've seen him before.
I think this is a timely text. Coming out of COVID, in these times we're living in, one of the things that I'm hearing a lot is pastors are tired, congregations are anxious. Maybe it's calmed down a little bit, but most churches have lost. I've seen national statistics that say about most churches have lost about 40% of the membership. Now some maybe have stayed online, watching on Sundays, but mostly it's people who have left for who knows whatever reasons. Is that true of any of you guys? No, not Blake. Everything's up to speed and up to date. No,
They came
just
back.
teasing.
Yeah, they came
Came
back.
back.
Good.
Praise
That's
God.
good. Praise God.
Praise God as
Yeah,
well.
but it's a struggle, and then we're living in such crazy times that during the COVID, of course, it was the mask versus the unmasked.
That was the electric shock treatment.
Guess it didn't work, right?
No idea what happened there.
Okay.
Hey, the battery's not going.
Is the battery going?
Is it the battery?
I don't know.
Sometimes the suit will play
Yeah,
havoc
if
with
the
the.
battery is, the light is off. That's what
Okay.
it is.
Can you grab him?
Should I tackle him or just grab the mic?
Sorry about that, guys.
Just unplug him and put him in mine.
Can I plug it?
Yeah.
Well, it's a
Let me
twist.
go
Oh,
grab a couple
yeah.
batteries for you. That didn't sound good.
Try not to do that again.
Must have been something I ate.
Mark.
Or as the cannibal said, must have been someone I ate. We're living in times when I think a lot of pastors really are feeling anxious because the churches are anxious. Congregations are their family systems, and you inject a lot of the anxiety from our culture into the life of the people. And so I think this is a timely passage. Can anybody identify with Elijah here? Anybody been in a moment? Well, let me put it this way. What we see is pretty good.
That's all right, Alex.
That's all right. Let me
Where are you?
feed me up.
Did you take it and throw it around?
Am I
That's it.
dragging it as a tail?
Yeah, there it is. Where's your,
There you go.
Careful.
oh, yeah. Let me turn. Right, hold on, so you like, me on the line.
do that, every pastor should have a little button that does that, you know, to get everybody awake when they start nodding off. You know, here, you read the previous chapter, chapter 18, and of course it's a great battle against the prophets of Baal. And so Elijah goes from this high moment to this low place. And we all feel that. You preach a sermon on Sunday, the service is good, the Lord is present, things are wonderful. You go home, you get an email from some disgruntled person, and you go down like Elijah. And that's, that's kind of the, and then if you're tired on top of that, everything is experienced even more intensely. This passage is a cascade of emotions and events that he goes through. He goes from, as I said, this moment of great victory, great glory, seeing God's hand in it, to suddenly being, down and running for his life. And we do that too. You guys are all veterans. I hope you've all learned not to get depressed Sunday afternoon and Monday. If you don't do a great job, younger guys don't know this, but you've got to get to that point where you say, God, help me do better next time. And I used to watch a sports show, Pardon the Interruption. Anybody watch that?
Yeah.
Tony Kornheiser and
Yeah.
Mike Wilbon. It's funny, that's good. But at the end of it, Tony Kornheiser always says, we'll try to do better tomorrow. I think every pastor should say that at the end of the service. I'm going to try to do better. Maybe don't say it, but but believe it. Lord, I'm going to try to do better next week. And that's what we have to have that attitude. Something doesn't work out, we offend someone, somebody leaves in anger or just leaves. Not to take it personally, but to say, Lord, if there's something there for me to see, help me to see it. Help me to humbly accept this from you. But let me do better next week, and I'm not going to be depressed over it. Elijah didn't do that. He goes into this fight or flight. He flees. I mean, his life is threatened. That's pretty serious stuff. And we're vulnerable, especially early on in the ministry. We are so vulnerable. I remember I was at my church 10 years, and I tell the story in my book, when a group of people tried to oust me. You think 10 years, you're through the honeymoon, you establish yourself. But there was a small group of people that actually tried to have me removed. And I could identify with Elijah here. I had a young family, we didn't own a home, and I'm thinking, I'm vulnerable. And thankfully, my church rallied eventually. It took them a while. And so this is what Elijah's going through. He's threatened and he's fleeing. The enemy is stirred up. When God is working, the enemy also gets stirred up. We need to understand it, and I think we do, but we need to learn it again and again. It's spiritual warfare. Now, the people are not the enemy. Sometimes they're just well-intentioned dragons, but often people get used by the enemy. But it is a battle, and it's not easy. And we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't be surprised when the threat comes. Just when you think you have peace in the, all is peaceful in the land, and then all of a sudden you realize, no, all is not peaceful. There's a problem here, and I need to face it and deal with it. But he runs as far as he can. He goes way down by the Dead Sea in Beersheba, and there he's exhausted. The Lord ministers to his needs. The Lord, he falls asleep. The Lord then feeds him. The angel feeds him, gives him something to drink. And in these times, God wants to care for us, and He will. He will care for us in various ways. And then he goes from there, ends up in Sinai, which is southwest of where he is, down at the Sinai Peninsula. And he goes into the cave. I think in the Hebrew it says the cave. I think it's the definite article, not a cave, meaning that it was the cave of Moses. It's where Moses went into the cleft of the rock and the Lord appeared to him. And it's there that the Lord appears to him. And that's when he hears from the Lord. He's got his little speech rehearsed. I've been very zealous for the Lord. He goes through that twice. Look at all, and we get into that mode. Lord, look at all I've done for you. We don't say it that way, but we think that. Lord, I've been working so hard, and and this is the treatment like St. Teresa of Avila once said when she was going through a time of trial. She said, Lord, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few of them. And we feel that. God, I'm being zealous for you. I'm laboring, I'm working hard, and this is the kind of treatment I'm getting. And he's in that mood, and we can identify with that. We get there too. And then finally, the Lord speaks to him. He has to get quiet, and he's starting to get. He says, basically, I want to die. I'm no better than my relatives, and he's at the point where he's probably thinking he's the problem. And this is a trick that the enemy will do sometimes to us, to get us thinking that we're the problem if there's conflict, if you're going through a rough patch in the church. That was the case with me when these folks came against me. My secretary at that time, who was a wonderful, godly woman, she was probably one of the most godly, kindest people I've ever known. Wonderful, wonderful person, and we had a great relationship. But even she got to the point where she said, Jack, maybe, in so many words, maybe it is you. Maybe you are the problem. What was happening is the church was changing. It was more and more people were coming to Christ, some in the church, but some from the outside. And the leadership was changing. It had been kind of a country club place. And this family, one family had had enough influence, enough power to remove my two predecessors. And they were going to try it again because they didn't like what was happening here. And when my secretary said that was so hard. Even my friends are turning against me here, and that's when I seriously contemplated maybe it is time to go. And never think that. Okay, we do think it. God will tell us when it's time to go. You don't have to worry about that. But sometimes things won't be going so well. We'll say maybe I'm not. Maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I'm not doing a good enough job. Maybe it's time for me to go. No, God has called you. If someone needs to go, let somebody else go, okay? Don't you go. Let them go. You're called, and God will tell you when that call is up. So, but he's at that place, and then finally, he doesn't even hear, the Lord asks him, what are you doing here? He doesn't even hear that. He just goes into it, so I've been very zealous for the Lord's speech. Does it twice. It's interesting that God, I'd love to preach it. It's too late for me now, but one of you guys should preach a series of sermons of all the questions the Lord asks in the Bible. It would take you a long time to do it, but it starts with Adam and Eve. Where are you? And here it is. And the Lord is such a gentleman that he asks us and allows us to speak and us to respond to our situation. And as coaches, were you going to say something, Mark?
No.
Okay. As coaches, that is what, and you're all at a season in life and with experience that you should be coaching younger pastors. And I pray that God will call you to that. It's a calling. If He doesn't call you, that's all right. But it is a calling. And we need to ask questions. We need to learn how. I need to learn to be a better question asker, and not. But the Lord asks him a question. What are you doing here? Gives us a little speech a second time, and then the Lord finally appears. And don't you love it when the Lord finally shows up in our situation and speaks to us, however He does that. And He does it in the still small voice, as the King James says, a gentle whisper. The Hebrew, and I don't read Hebrew, but I can read commentaries. The Hebrew says it was the sound of fine silence. I don't know what that means, but the sound of fine silence. The silence of the sound. Well, it does when the Lord speaks. And he hears finally what the Lord is saying. And the Lord reconfirms his calling. And that's what's so beautiful about this, because it's in these times when we're doubting, when we're feeling threatened, when we're blaming ourselves, that we need to re-establish that call. We need to hear again that God has us where we're supposed to be. And if we're not, he'll tell us. In the meantime, you stay put. You preach, pray, love, stay. I've heard that. And I use that more than you realize, Blake. Thank you. and he gets recommissioned. Now, he doesn't live long enough to see Jezebel killed. I think he lives long enough to see Ahab killed. I'd have to check. Yeah, but he doesn't see this happen. But it happens after he is gone. And who is it that appears on the Mount of Transfiguration? Moses and Elijah. And so much of what we're doing as pastors, we'll only get to see it from the other side and see what the meaning of that event was, what really came of that. So have a long vision. Every pastor should have a 100-year vision. You're not going to be here in 100 years, but if you lay a foundation that's solid, the church will be, if Christ doesn't come back, and somebody else will be laboring. And they'll say, praise God for Blake Brown, or whoever, that he laid the foundation for this ministry that we have now. The church came to life, and back then, we're going to celebrate Founders Day this Sunday, and they'll bring out a photograph of Blake and be all, sepia toned, and people will rise up and call you blessed because you had the faithfulness and the vision too. So I think it's a good text to share with other pastors. All right, let's talk a little bit about revitalization. And again, you guys should be up. Oh, I want to do one last thing. I want to hand this out. This is from a guy who was coaching the cohort in soccer. Yeah, it'd be great. Kevin Lawson is his name. He's a prof. He's now part-time prof at Talbot Theological School in Los Angeles. Biola is the college, Bible Institute of LA, which is what Biola means, and but they have a theological school called Talbot. He's a prof there, and he came up with this. It's a good test, and there's even a part for your wife to comment, but this would be good for you to actually fill out. I was going to have people fill it out right now, but I don't think I will. But I would encourage you to read it, put it in your Bible, and read it, because it's about taking care of yourself in ministry. Elijah didn't seem to do that maybe, and God had to care for him, and God will care for us. But we also need to care for ourselves, because ministry is hard, ministry is exhausting. So I hope you're all taking time. One of the things that has really astonished me, I do about twice a month I'll guest preach for guys that I know, and I don't go looking for work. But I'm astonished at how few guys are taking time off. They might take 2 weeks off in the summertime. You need more than that. You need time to think. You need time to be with your family, especially. And so take enough time and encourage younger guys to do the same. All right, let me just kind of walk you through my book, and you still can buy it if you want, but you don't need to. But I compared the whole revitalization process to a marriage. Not very original, right? I think there's somewhere in the Bible where the church is compared to a marriage. I've seen that passage somewhere. And now, pastors are not the bride of Christ. We know the bride of Christ. But we kind of function in a way that is analogous to a relationship, to a marriage relationship. When you come into a church that has been abused by a pastor, in a lot of ways, it's almost like, and I've only been married once, and that's all I would want, right? Say that right.
She's not here.
She's not here. I am 50 years next year.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm still in love, so that's good.
Amen.
But if you've been in a broken relationship, or you know, certainly we all know people have, when somebody marries into that, there's all kinds of baggage, this hurt. It's complicated, it's difficult. We've counseled folks in that situation. Extremely difficult. Blending families is one of the hardest things on earth. And, but that's sort of what happens when you come into a church, especially a church that's been wounded, a church that has declined, a church that has struggled. You now are in that role of that new husband, so to speak. And it's messy, it's complicated. And so I start off by talking about the engagement, which is really that sense of discerning a call. And And I've got some questions. I hope Jacob is asking good questions in that, because you need to ask a lot of questions as you go into the church. And make sure that this is really where God has you. And I talk about that in the book. Then I talk about the honeymoon. And this is a season really of building trust. You're still in the honeymoon, definitely. I misunderstood the honeymoon, and not my actual honeymoon. That my poor wife had an earache from the airplane, so it kind of ruined the first couple of days of how you have a cold, you go on an airplane and you get the whole ear thing going. Anyway, but we made up for it, that's for sure. But the idea that you're in the church is predisposed to give you a lot of favor during that time, because they want this to work. They don't want to have to go start all over again, right? And they have a marriage, and let's make this work. I think pastors abuse that. I think I did, looking back, in that we take that compliance as agreement, that they actually agree with what we want to do. I don't think it is. I think, as I said, it's a desire to get along, to go along, to get along. And so I tell pastors, you said it right, Randall, don't change anything. I'd say don't change anything in the first year. Don't change anything major, maybe in the first 2 or 3 years, until you really have a sense of where the church is and where God is leading you in this. So in that honeymoon time, you're earning trust. And it's very hard to recapture that. If you blow it, you're probably not going to be able to recover that sense. It's very hard. And that is the most common mistake young pastors make. Steve, I'm sure you've seen that. When they go into a church, and if you think about it, most churches do need revitalizing, even if they're solidly evangelical. They kind of drift from their mission, they become inwardly focused and all of that. So whatever church you're going into, chances are it needs a renewal by the Holy Spirit. And God's going to use the pastor to do that as the leader of it. I think, how do I get onto that? When you're in that situation, you are learning, you're listening, you're building trust. You're trying to understand that culture, you're embracing their culture. And the biggest mistake they make is they try to impose their vision. And a pastor comes from a church maybe that is healthy, tries to put that vision on the church. Very, very unfortunate to do that. It really is better. This is their world. You're there to love them in those early times, build trust, and accrue that confidence of them in you, in your understanding of them and your confidence in them, that will allow you then to lead. Have you read the book Canoeing the Mountains? That's a good book.
Yeah.
Okay. Todd Bolsinger is his name. But the idea comes from Lewis and Clark. They thought they were going to find mountains like the Appalachians when they traveled west, because that's all they'd ever seen. And then they get to the Rocky Mountains, which is range after range after range, hundreds, I think maybe 100 miles across, incredible, as you know. And they thought they'd be able to pull they had these barges, they thought they'd be able to pull them up the Grand Falls in Montana and the Missouri River, which again is miles and miles. It's not one falls, it's miles and miles and miles of. So they had to abandon the boats, buy ponies from the Indians, and then make their way through the mountains. And so his point is that we are now in the post-Christian era. We are off the map. You can't go back and say we're going to do it the way we did it before. You're in the mountains now. You're off the river. And it's a whole new way. It's an interesting book. But he says that, what's that?
I just said that's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
Way to put it.
Yeah, and he says in order to, and they were off the map. The maps only went as far as the Rockies, and they didn't have any scale of the Rockies at all. And so they were literally off the map, off the chart. We are figuratively speaking off the chart. Church is not the way it was. It's never going to come back to that. And so we're in new territory. And he says, in this early season especially, you've got to, how does he put it? You got to earn the right to lead, but you do it through technical competence and relational congruence. Fancy words, I said it easier than that, but technical competence, you've got to show that you can preach. You may not be a great preacher yet, it takes, whoever is. We're always learning, we're always growing. But you show that you can preach the word. You're competent in, managing the church, visiting, all of that. You've got to give them that confidence that you're not going to get up there and faint. I knew a pastor in Massachusetts, he would faint in the pulpit. He was in a little church in Magnolia, in North Shore. I can still remember. And he had to leave the ministry. He'd get up there and he was so nervous, so anxious. And the people, can you imagine that sitting out there? Good man, but anyway, they have to have the confidence that that's not going to happen, that you are competent. And you have to have relational congruence, and by that fancy kind of psychological term, by that he means that you're comfortable with who you are, you know who you are, you're comfortable in relationships, in emotions. When people are losing their temper and all, you don't lose yours. You're monitoring yourself. Some people call it EQ. You've heard that phrase? Okay, emotional, like IQ, but emotional intelligence, basically. That you can navigate relationships, you can navigate the complexity of ministry, which is it's a family system, but it's a very complicated family system, much more complicated than a nuclear family, and so you've got to have that. And when you have that, then they give you the permission to lead them off the map. And Lewis and Clark he goes into great detail about that expedition in 1804, which doubled the size of America in one trip. And he goes into detail about that and shows the competence that these two men had. And only one person died, and that was from an appendectomy. But they encountered hostile Indians, tribes, unbelievable hardships through the Rocky winter in the Rockies. Anyway, but it's when we exhibit that, then the congregation gives us the right to lead them in these uncharted waters. And but once you start to lead, then you're going to start to get conflict, as you know, because people don't like to be changed. They don't like, the old saying, the only person who likes change is a wet baby, right? You've heard that? Nobody else likes change. We hate change because everything about us, every living organism seeks homeostasis. Greek word, wonderful Greek word. We all maintain that comfort zone that we have to have in order to live. Even a dysfunctional family, very dysfunctional family, and you'll encounter a lot of them in ministry, because healthy churches attract unhealthy people. They attract healthy people, but they also attract unhealthy people. And the reason is unhealthy people want to be healthy. And so don't be surprised that they come. And the power of the gospel is strong. They may well achieve some health. They probably will never be completely whole because they're wounded. And just like if you've got scar tissue or you have broken bones, you're going to feel that every time the weather gets damp or whatever. So, but as even in unhealthy people, unhealthy situations, there is a homeostasis. And often, and perhaps you've encountered this, police encounter it all the time. They go into a domestic squabble, and what happens? Both people, husband and wife, turn on the cop. And it'll happen to pastors, right? Because you are upsetting the homeostasis of even that dysfunctional system. What's that?
I just said that's very.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And feel free, anybody, if I say something you want to chime in on, do that, okay? Because I shouldn't be teaching this, you guys should.
Yeah, you
Yes.
said there was going to be discussion. So
Yes, please do.
I plan to interrupt a lot.
Undo it, Marcus.
I just want to go and ask you a question about something that you said.
Yep.
If Jacob goes to the church,
That's
and
our,
he's got a
that's
church.
our resident.
That's our
Yes,
resident,
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And he senses that they want to implement something right away. Should he
Oh,
hold
yeah.
off?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like what you're saying is, in the honeymoon period, they might just want to make everything so smooth that you'll still be stepping on some sacred cows
yeah.
that you don't even know you're doing, even in their willingness.
Yeah.
And so you should just hold off.
I would say, find out why they want this. Now, it may work, it may be exactly, they may have been champing at the bit with the previous guy to move in this direction. But I would say, that's where you want to ask them, okay, what is the vision? You know, they're seeing something, why do you want to do this? I would probe around it, you know, say, I'm not against it, seems like a good idea, but let's just figure out why we're doing this, is God really in this? And, but yeah, I know churches that immediately, no certain churches, when people come in, they immediately want to start with something. And you don't, what happens typically though, is that the church has an understanding, the people have an understanding of who they are, what their mission is, how they function, all that. The pastor comes in as an outsider, almost as a virus. and so they go into antibody mode, and they attack the virus. I mean, that's not that far off. And yeah, go ahead, please, Randall.
I think that fits with what you said. I know I already talked about this with some of the folks downstairs, but the church that I was called to 10 years ago, there were some folks, and it had kind of come up as a perennial issue whether they should continue in association with the denomination
Yep.
they had historically been part of for
Yep.
about 100 years.
Okay.
And people asked, you know, like, oh, new pastor, new season, maybe we should change the denomination. And basically on the advice of professors and mentors who had said some similar things that you've already shared with us, particularly about building trust,
Yep.
said don't change anything. And so I asked basically for a 3-year stay. We tabled the major decision for 3 years, mostly to build relationships so that there was trust. Even if the majority of the church wants to go in that direction, I think I should not be leading this, or you're saying that I want to, you know, I appreciate
No, go ahead.
you sharing from a place of wisdom, but it seems,
Who's that you're talking about?
you know, the pastor, this young guy, is going to be vulnerable. Even if the church wants to go, like, what's it going to, I would want to know, what's it going to cost to wait another 2 or 3 years
Yeah.
doing it?
Yeah.
If it's the right decision and it's going to go that way, and then in 3 years, he might have what our elders have called a reservoir of goodwill
Yeah.
that will help him get through what could be tumultuous,
Yeah.
even if it's just a small vocal minority.
Yep.
Right, we tell him,
That's very wise.
we told
Reservoir. That's
Jacob
good.
not to change the light bulb in the first 2 years.
Yeah.
But,
Unless they're out.
but a lot of young pastors, and I know I have this feeling if I went, is you want to feel like you're making a difference. So their kindness in wanting to go a certain way might feed into your ego.
Yeah.
And so we need to counsel them to kind of, you know, I'm here to preach the gospel for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
And then we'll.
I think that's good.
Right.
I think that's very wise. And he has your ear, evidently, Jacob, so good. And it's not even necessarily that that they want to make a difference. I think, and here's maybe my own sinful nature, I think we go in and feel like this church is messed up. I need to set it straight. And, you know, as young people, we kind of have that, you know, yeah. We're headstrong, we think we know what's best, and we've gotten all this stuff in school, and we want to apply it also. But that's really wrong, isn't it? I tell these young guys, imagine your grandparents. I mean, I had people who were 3 times my age when I started. I was 29, I just turned 30. I had people, you know, and I had 75 people. We only got about maybe 40 in the summer, maybe about 60 during the year. And there was a handful of young families, but mostly older. But this vast congregation that never came because they were too hungry. I had 75 people over 75 in that church. I remember that. It's kind of an easy thing to remember. And that was their world. You know, imagine your grandparents or your parents in a situation. How much are they going to change? Right? If they're not going to change, why are you assuming these people are going to change? Because you said it's what we need to do. So we really need to encourage young guys, if you're working with a younger pastor, encourage them to go slow. to really get the lay of the land. And if you get young kids or grandkids, when they're about 3 or 4, they get into the thing where, what's that? What's that? And you tell them, why? And you answer, why? And so I finally figured out how to cut that off. You say, why not? And they don't know the answer for that. Anyway, but then be like a little child, encourage young guys, why do you do it this way? Not criticizing, just want to know. Where did that tradition come from? Anyway, so that's the honeymoon.
And even John Maxwell, in his leadership classes, he mentions in his leadership book to build that relationship,
Yeah.
build the trust, and not to make any changes
Yeah.
to years.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, they're not going.
Yeah, they're not going to trust you. You haven't earned the right to lead off the map, so, yeah.
I just want to ask a quick
Sure.
question, because part of your premise is you said that we're kind of in a post-Christian age,
Yep.
that we can't do things that have been done, that those options aren't available to us, and that's the
Yep.
statement. So what do you see as not necessarily, say, maybe culturally viable, or what's kind of behind that statement? What are you kind of pointing at?
Post-cultural, post-Christian, the fact that nobody goes to church anymore. Maine is, I think, second in the whole country after Vermont. I think I have it right here.
We buy first.
2%.
Yeah, we go back and forth with them, that's right. I think, according to this, in 2017, 16% of Vermont was religious, defined by Barna. I don't know what it was, but that was, Maine is second at 22%. So clearly that's what's changed. People don't identify, in fact, Christians are on their way to becoming a minority religion. Not yet, we're still a majority religion, but being surpassed by, what is the term? None of the above, or something like that. Non-religious, something. What is it?
Spiritual.
Nuns, yeah, N-O-N-E-S, right, that's right. Spiritual, but not Christian. And so that's where we are. It's never going to go back, in fact, probably down through history, except for brief periods of time. It has always been, that we're walking that narrow path, and few there are that find it. So,
Thank you.
yeah. I think the sermon that we need to the text I think that pastors really need to kind of reflect on and study is Acts 17, which is Paul when Paul goes to Athens. And he starts out in the synagogue because that's comfortable for him, but then he goes into the marketplace and he's debating with the philosophers there. The church, we need to figure out how to get into the marketplace, and the marketplace is wherever people are, basically. Might literally be, if you work at Hannaford's or Shaw's, that might be the marketplace for you. But otherwise, it's where you work, it's where you live, it's where you go to the gym, it's where you have your sports car. Blake, go ahead, talk about that.
Just another thing that answers your question is we think that we rely on the attractional model.
It's
We're
dead.
just a good church, people will come. If there's good preaching, people will come.
Yeah.
And that's just not true.
No, it's gone, or it's going.
Going.
Yeah, it's going. And if you do get people that way, they will, chances are, unless they have just moved in from
Right.
somewhere else, they probably have left another church that they have been disgruntled with, and they've come to you, and they probably just maybe a matter of time before they're disgruntled with you,
Right.
and they go on. But you're absolutely right, Blake. That model is dead. If you want another term, we have to become the missional church. We have to go back to basically what Jesus called us to do, and that is make disciples. And it's challenging because we have created basically a consumer. We've fed into it, a consumer culture, consumer churches, and so people will look for the place where they can get the most value for the least money. The least amount of work, the least amount of expectation, the least amount of demands on me. And so they're looking for comfortable places. And boy, as pastors, it's tempting. It's tempting to play that game because we need people, we need bodies. And it's so easy to do the ABCs. When the treasurer comes to you and says, you know, we're not paying the bills, and a whole bunch of people just left. And why do they leave? Well, maybe because, hopefully it's not because of us causing offense, right? Should never be because of that, but if the gospel causes offense. So that's where we are. I think we are in for some rough sledding, and I don't, you know, we're a European culture. In New England kind of leads the way, I think. You can still go down south, and the Christianity is still very strong. Friends of ours moved down to Charlotte from our church, and they said in New England, first question you get asked is, what do you do? Down there, the first question you get asked is, where do you go to church? And you had better have an answer, because they will say, you're coming to our church this week. And they will, yeah. I mean, they love it. They were so happy to get out of Massachusetts. But that's not where the culture's going. I wish it was. I wish we'd have a revival, but I just don't see that happening unless the culture gets so bad, and I mean really, really bad. Then the church has wonderful opportunities, and it does now, but we've got to get into the community. We've got to figure out a way to get into the marketplace. And Paul earns the right. He's there in the marketplace, and he then, and we don't know how long he was there. He was waiting for Timothy and I think Silas to come down from Berea. And I looked on a map, and that's about 200 miles away, and they had to walk. So he's there alone for a while, maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, who knows. So he wasn't just in and out, like I went to Athens, you get off the bus, you go around, take your picture, get back on, and go. Yeah. Anyway, you're not going to win many converts there that way, but he's there, and he's in the culture, he's in the marketplace. And then they invite him to the Areopagus, and they want to hear what he has to say, because he's been talking to them. And you read that sermon, and it's only a little snapshot. Let me just read a little bit. I'm kind of off track here, but that's all right. This would be a great Bible study to have with your leadership, your elders, if you're moving in this direction. If you're realizing you need to, that it's not Kansas anymore. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that, and that word is literally parasitism. That's the Greek word, parasitism. We use that word, it came right to us in English. It means to be so bothered by something that you're actually shaking. Okay? He was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks. You know, that's a pretty friendly audience right there. Eventually, of course, you know, you're going to have problems when you tell them about the greatest Jew who ever lived. But anyway, as well as in the marketplace, day by day, with those who happened to be there, a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. Some of them asked him, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and Anastasius, right? Anastasia is the word for resurrection. It's a woman's name. Must be talking about this God, Jesus, and his female consort, Anastasia. They took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean. This is what we need to get to with our ministry in the community, to the point where people say, what you're doing is good. I want to be part of this. I want to know this. You know what I found? We are living in such broken times. I think some of the best ministries that a church can have, and you have the leaders to do it. One is divorce care. Has anybody done divorce care? That if you have divorced people in the church or in the community, better. Divorce care. It's a cookbook. It's all packaged. It's all video, but it's Christ-centered. It's biblical, but it is a caring ministry, and that. When people are cared for in that way, because, you know, hopefully none of us have been through divorce, but people who do, it is probably one of the worst human experiences you can have. And it's just horrible. And when people are cared for, who else is caring? They're having to pay someone, a therapist, or an attorney to care for them. You're caring for them through this wonderful ministry, led by somebody who's been through a divorce and found healing, found Christ, found healing, and has credibility. They show up at your church because they want to know what you're saying. There's all kinds of ministries like that. The backyard Bible clubs for kids, Awana, and you can go right down the list. We found AA, not the recovery ministry. AA was one of our best ministries. It's not Christ-centered, but people finally get sober and they realize that light is not your higher power. That's what they're told. Find your higher power. It could be that light or it could be that fan. Focus on that. That's your higher power. And they're smart enough now, they're sober, they can think, that's not my higher power. And through that, a new person would show up at our church and I'd say, how'd you find us? Dave. That's all I had to say, Dave. Dave was the guy who ran the AA group who went to our church. Anyway, you're out there and you're caring for people, you're listening to them, you're engaging with them, and then finally some of them, and there's all kinds of things you can do. And most of them are, you didn't get them out of a video series. They're all prepackaged. You don't have to create them. Mom to Mom is another one. Mothers of preschoolers. Where are the needs in your community? They're different every one. A youth ministry maybe that finally cares for the kids in the community. Anyway, we have to get to that point, and then he preaches, and his sermon is incredible. I'm probably taking too much time here, but here's the best introduction you could ever have for a sermon. He stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious," and the word for religious is actually, the root is demon. So, it doesn't mean demon, but in that context, but it doesn't mean, they're biblical, obviously, but they're religious. The place is full of idols. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, "To an unknown God." They're trying to cover all the bases. They didn't want to leave anybody out. Here's his introduction. Blake, wouldn't you love this introduction? "I saw your altar to an unknown God." I'm going to tell you who he is. Wow. What a way to start a sermon. And then he says, "The God who made the world and everything in it, the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in a temple built by hands. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else." Isn't this the gospel? I'm going to tell you about a God who serves you. You think you have to serve him? No, he serves you. He doesn't need anything, right? That's the gospel. Because these people think the world thinks they have to earn it and engage it. And Blake, you are known as a gospel preacher. I respect that about you. I've heard that from other people. That is our message. And then, they were interested in motion, Aristotle, all that. He says, in this God who created everything, we live and move and have our being. He's speaking their language. He spent enough time in the community. He knows who they are. He knows what they're interested in. But then he hits them hard here because he talks about the resurrection. Neither the Epicureans nor the Stoics believe in the resurrection. But if you think about it, everybody's interested in what happens after death, right? Everybody wants to know what happens when we die. But they don't believe in the resurrection because everybody today is basically a Platonist. They believe that the soul lives, the spirit dies, the body dies, the soul lives. And everybody's a universalist. Everybody goes to heaven. You didn't know that, Steve? Everybody goes. Yeah. What about Adolf Hitler? Well, I don't know. Maybe he had what's that?
One or two.
One or two, right. It's a very small place. We have to combat that. But we combat it with the teaching of the resurrection. Anyway, I've said enough about that, but it's a great text, and he wins a few people. Not many, but a handful. And so, as you lead the church that way, you are going to get conflict because we are threatening this homeostasis. I then talk in the book about the revitalization that happens as a church begins to move, and so worship gets revitalized. And this is the worship are the shoals, and if you're going to shipwreck your church, it's probably going to be on those shoals. So move carefully with worship. But I go into some detail in my book. Have it, really understand in your own heart what your theology and philosophy of worship is, what it means, and then how you're going to try to live that out in your church. Again, we go in and say, I hate these old songs, I don't like the hymns, let's move right to praise music. Yeah. Well, right, doesn't work too well if that's what they're used to. Blake, chime in.
I tell this anecdote to Jacob. When I got here, I thought that we used to have 2 candles on either side of the table, and people used to forget to light the candles, and so I'd be preaching, and people would literally crawl up on the floor to light the candles, and nobody's listening to me. Who cares what Christ is doing? Let's see if he can light this candle. And so I thought, one day I'll just take them out so that we don't worry about them anymore. And talk about shoals, it was just 2 candlesticks. But boy, oh boy, where are the candlesticks? What happened to the candlesticks? Why aren't the candlesticks there? Who took away the candlesticks? Oh, okay.
Yep.
So, you wander into those, you think, I can do a little change.
Yeah.
It's not. But
Forget about it.
that just taught me a valuable lesson. Don't
Yeah.
touch the candlesticks.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like young
We
Frankenstein.
probably all have a story about that.
Yeah.
Randall has one, I'm sure.
Oh. No, I was just reacting to Blake went through.
And what is the real problem? The problem isn't the candles. The problem is maybe a little bit our ego, but our feeling about what is the right thing here. And so not you, Blake, but I made boneheaded moves because I insisted that lighting those candles that way was not the right thing to do. So we're going to get rid of the candle. Better probably would be to say, Mary, would you see that the candles are lighted every Sunday morning? That's your job. Or get those kind that just have the little light bulb. Anyway, but we so, I think back on some things I did, and it's our ego that says this is how we solve the problem. Now maybe have a little conversation about it. Might be a better way to do it.
Or another one is the flag.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Careful.
Yeah. How many have had to move the flag back in after they took it out?
Twice.
With great humility.
That flag is a yo-yo.
Twice.
It disappears, it comes back, it disappears, it comes back.
I know. Did the gospel ever fail in its power because there was a flag in the front of the sanctuary? I can't remember. I mean, that's what it comes down to. How important is this? Is this me? That's me. It's my ego. I want to do this. I want my way. Anyway, yeah, and the worship, it has to evolve because we don't worship the way people worship 50, 100 years ago. Everything changes. But how we lead that process is very, very challenging. We were talking about that on the way up.
I think my biggest thought was unity. When I started, I was like, I have to have unity, especially as a small church.
Yeah.
If I don't have unity, and so I had the narrative was we're a family, we do things as a family, so I had to make compromises
Yeah.
to keep that as a family
Yeah.
and keep that narrative going.
Yeah.
And so that was where I've had to compromise, where I've got older music and a great worship team, a worship leader who does a great job. We're doing a lot of worship this summer because our pianist we've been doing for a long time and gets paid by the church to play the piano. And frankly, I like the songs she does. I mean, I'm in both sides of it. And she was gone for a while, so we had praise and worship. It was great. She came back from surgery and health and brought her back in. Okay, I guess that's what we're doing. But that'll be the dance we do for a long time to maintain kind of the unity of the church.
Yeah. In the meantime, it can be a fertile time. You can begin praying with your leaders. How should we worship? How does the Lord want us to worship Him? That's the question. Not what do I like? Do I like this music better than that music? No, it's, how does the Lord want us to worship Him in this season, in this culture? Because it is culturally relevant. We certainly don't worship the way the ancient Israelites do. They know, I think we know a little bit about the synagogue in the worship service. It was really roughly based on the synagogue. There was a time of praise, there was a gathering, then there was a time of praise and prayers, and then there was the Word. And you see that in the gospel. Jesus reads the Word in His own synagogue in Nazareth. And then there was a response to the Word. There were offerings, not sacrificial offerings, financial offerings and others that were made. And that was the response. And that's really what worship is. We enter with praise, we hear the Word, and then we respond to the Word with the giving, or with the Lord's Supper, or with, maybe maybe baptism. All of those are responses to, hearing what God has done. The analogy that I think is so beautiful is Kierkegaard's, where he says, worship is a drama, but it's not a drama as we might think it is. A drama has actors, it has prompters who are behind the curtains prompting the actors, and it has an audience. We tend to think the audience is you guys out there. We're the actors, and we sure hope the Holy Spirit prompts us this morning so we do a good job. He said, no, it's the audience is God. The congregation are the actors. We're the pastors and the music leaders, we're the prompters. We're prompting these people to help them, encourage them to engage with the Holy God. And when we think of it that way, then my ego is out of it. Whoever gets to see a prompter, if you see them, something went wrong in the play, right?
Just like before when your mic went.
Yeah, and you're not supposed to hear them. They're supposed to do a stage whisper so that the actor hears them. Anyway, that's our role, and I think that's brilliant.
I sometimes remind the congregation that worship is not a spectator sport. Like in our culture, they want to come in and sit and be entertained, be led.
Yep.
Say something excited. I want to leave with a sense of like I got this week, but it's not worship.
Yeah. No, it isn't. And who knows, sometimes if we're there to really encounter God, sometimes we may be very sad because we're convicted. Sometimes we might be angry because we're convicted. Sometimes we might be bored because, God seems absent in our life. It's not about them, it's about me and my relationship. Work at worship, I think it's the one thing that we can really have a lot of control over. And I visit a lot of churches and I see a lot of trivialization of worship. And by that I mean announcements being made endlessly about stuff that is just not important. Put it in the bulletin, put it up on the screen, put it on the website or whatever, on Facebook. But precious worship time is consumed by things that really aren't important. So, yeah. Anyway, work at worship. And again, if you're coaching or helping someone, help them understand. There's a good book by Gordon MacDonald, who was at Grace Chapel in Lexington for many years, called The Worship Wars. Do you read The Worship Wars?
I have.
Okay.
I have Jacob Reed, Who Stole My Church.
Oh, that's what it is. Who Stole My Church? Exactly. That is, what's his name? Gordon MacDonald. Yeah. He talks about the worship wars.
Yeah.
Uses that phrase. Anyway, then often what happens is the church begins to understand discipleship. And you guys.
Before you go into another topic, maybe we can take like a 5-minute break.
Sure, please do.
Stretch and
Yep.
a cup of coffee
Yep.
or another.
And then we go till
12:30.
12:30. Okay. Yeah, feel free guys to chime in.
Yep.
And I'd like you guys to talk about discipleship. What God is showing you in that, because that's how we move out of the country club church.
Oh, no problem.
So forward, I can really interact.
Yeah, you sure can. I'll give you. No. I will give you the book, but I need to give you change. I'll give you 10 back.
I do.
Huh?
Speaking my
I'll
language.
give you 2 books. Give one away.
Okay,
Give one away.
I'll give it to Mike.
Do that, yeah. That'd be good. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, you heard about it.
Well, no, we made it fun. What we did was the communion morning.
Yep.
So what I did is, I was like, look, the candles not lit. So we went up to the Honda, and I said, can we do a little bit of the music before?
Right.
Yeah, then it becomes judgeship.
Right.
It
does.
My son's allowed to look down.
I mean, I think people, and I don't know, I've been sharing this hospital, I don't have a lot of experience for it.
Just kind of think
Yeah.
about it, it does, this is this context,
Maybe even more than what I hear.
Yeah.
Actually has a lot.
Oh, he did, okay.
I think it does.
And then he'd come back and say, well, I'm not teaching them.
He'd give you different reasons.
Class is starting,
Right.
Sean.
Exactly what I was asking.
I didn't see everybody sitting down, sorry. Blake's not back, so, you know.
I know. That's all right, he'll be able.
I think they've got it on a continuous stream.
That's what he told me.
All right. The outline of my book is very simple. You know, the engagement period, that's kind of asking the questions and seeing if there's a good fit. The honeymoon, then you get kind of down to living. This couple comes back from the honeymoon, and that's when you kind of figure out how we're going to live together as a husband and wife. That's often a time when there's, you know, conflict, hopefully not major, but and that's in the church as well, because you're bringing different expectations, different roles to that relationship. But then you survive that period, and then a church really can enter onto a very fruitful season. Often it doesn't happen until, like I said, it didn't begin until after 10 years when that period of, that group of people finally left. And we gave them, you know, the church really handled it well. And I talked a little bit in the book about it. But they handled it well, and the church really from that point on was set free in so many ways. And we really entered onto a period of wonderful fruitfulness. In hindsight, worship was probably the hardest thing to figure out, as I said, because it's so fraught with different expectations and needs. And finally, after many years, I think figured that out and got to the point where, and I think we need to grow when you think how much the Old Testament talks about worship, down to the, you know, the minute detail, the garments and all of that in the tabernacle. To really pay attention to that, because we work and pray that the Holy Spirit will honor us with His presence on, I mean, He's everywhere, obviously, but there would be a time when we sense, you know, in the holiness of worship, sense His presence and He works in our lives. Strive for that. Discipleship, and in hindsight, we could have done a better job at this. We eventually did begin to, are we on? Okay. We eventually did, I think, begin to understand this. And we did most of our discipleship in small group settings. And I think probably one of our most effective ways in discipleship is, I think, most simply, if you could reduce it to the irreducible core, which is what Tom Johnston calls it, is loving God, loving others, and making disciples as you go. Pretty basic, pretty simple.
Yeah.
But that's what we need. We need to know how to do that. We need to teach our people how to do that. And that is hard because people want consumer Christianity. They want the easy stuff. But when you start challenging them that they are responsible to disciple their own children, sure, bring them to Sunday school, bring them to youth group, but you are the discipler. We can't make them Christians. Only you can. And, you know, obviously only the Holy Spirit can, but you know what I'm saying. And then, but we did it, one of the most effective, I think, ways of doing this, especially for men, was with triads. 3 men meeting together monthly, weekly, you know, bi-weekly, whatever, kind of set the parameters, to work through the basics of the Christian faith. And Greg Ogden, who was a roommate of mine at Fuller Seminary many years ago, has written that wonderful book, Discipleship Essentials. And John Piper was a classmate. Wayne Grudem was a classmate. What happened? Tim Keller was almost a classmate. He was a year behind me at Gordon. What happened to me?
You wrote a book.
Yeah.
Get a book.
Yeah, right. Big deal. Anyway, name dropper. I wish I could say I hang with him. I don't. I don't know who I am anymore. But was in those triads, 3 men will trust each other. You get 8 men together. It's going to be years before they trust each other. But men will, a couple of guys, and you need 3. 2 is not a. I mean, you can do a one-on-one, and that's very effective. But there's a process that happens and a dynamic that happens with 3. Those are very effective. There are triads in my church in Massachusetts that have been going on for 20 years, and the guys still are faithful to each other, meeting. In some cases they're online, having Zoom meetings now because they need a little money. Anyway, women, it was often bigger groups. Alpha, and I'm not original, so I loved cookbooks. I call these things cookbooks, like divorce care. You follow the recipe. If you stick with the recipe, you often will get a result. And Alpha was probably one of our best ways of discipling, evangelizing and discipling in leadership training. Has anybody done Alpha? You guys have, okay. Our church in Massachusetts is still, they've been doing it continuously for probably 25 years. And it's not a one and done. Often we do these things one and done. Well, we tried that, it was pretty good. Let's go on to the next new thing and do it one and done. It had nothing to do with me, but the woman who was leading Alpha, she stuck with it, and she worked it. And it's good to have somebody, if you can find somebody who really will embrace it. In our church in Gardner that we're worshiping at now is probably going to start Alpha. And the advice I'll give is, start it as a pastor, but only if you have someone in the wings who will take it over, who is called and gifted, because you never want to push anything you're not prepared to push forever, okay? You don't want to get stuck doing something that you're not prepared to do forever. So, but Alpha, it's adaptable to all kinds of settings. You can do it with high school kids, you can do it with senior citizens. We had a group that did it in women's prison and in a men's prison. There's a brief version of it. You can do it during a lunch break. We had a downtown situation where the church was, and there were a lot of women who worked kind of in the area, and they would meet at lunch for about 45 minutes and do Alpha. It's very adaptable. It is a wonderful evangelistic tool. If you do start it, you start it with your own people, but those people then, your people then have to go into the community and invite, on the basis of the trust they have earned, invite their family members, their friends, their neighbors, and once you reach that point, that's kind of a tipping point. And then those people, you spend 10 weeks together with a meal. Don't skip the meal. With a meal, we found it was best done on a weeknight evening. A weeknight evening. I think that's redundant. And so you share the meal, and then there's a small group that meets. And it's good if the pastor is not the small group leader, because everybody will look at Blake for the answer. And you don't want to give them the answer. You want the answer to come out of the teaching that you just watched, and you want the answer, you want them to struggle with the answer. It's a permissive environment where someone may say, well, I believe everybody goes to heaven. And you don't say, oh, no. Let me correct you. You say, all right, that's interesting. A lot of people believe that. And tell me more about why you believe that. And in the process, those 10 weeks of them realizing how silly their answers are and their faith system is, some of them actually come to Christ. And there's a retreat that you take, and it's recommended that you do at least one overnight. So we used to do a Friday night and a Saturday in a nice place. We'd go up to New Hampshire. And often on that weekend, that's when you give people the opportunity to give their lives to Christ. And they're a little bit influenced by John Wimber and the Vineyard theology. So they talk about tongue speaking. And there's a video on that. We would not show that video. I would talk about the gifts of the Spirit. And I believe in the gifts of the Spirit. I believe in tongue speaking. But like Paul, I'd rather have 5,000 intelligible words. I mean, one intelligible word than what, 10,000 or 5,000, whatever, a lot of babble. And so you teach a healthy, balanced doctrine of tongues, so you don't shipwreck their young faith on the issue of tongues, which is not that, is not that important. So anyway, and what happens is everybody has to be trained. We would do it twice a year. We'd start in the fall, go like from October till early December. You want to stop before December, because everybody's busy in December, whatever 10 weeks those are, and work in the retreat. Then, and often out of it, you can't take it twice. So out of the Alpha program, the people want to stay together. We've bonded. We've been together every night for these 10 weeks. We run in the retreat together. We want to stay together. So we would do what we call just a beta group, Alpha, Beta. It was just a Bible study. But that group would then stay together. And hopefully the leader or the assistant leader, because you always had two, leading group, would then take that group on. And often they would meet right at the same time. We had enough room that we could have the Alpha group and then going off to one of the Sunday school rooms in the building. And it's good to have it in a church building, because believe it or not, a church building is more neutral and accessible than a home. You can walk into a church. I can't walk into your house unless you invite me. And so it works better in an institution. And then that group could then go from a beta where they study the Bible, and then you've got to have somebody who's caring for the beta groups, because they can start to multiply. But that's often where the discipleship happened. And then you'd start again. We'd do it again. We'd have an introductory dinner where find out about Alpha, and people would invite their friends. And I mean, I can tell you stories that we had a scientist, a British scientist. He and his wife came over from the UK to work in some biotech. He's a PhD, brilliant guy, and his wife had become a Christian, I think, in the UK, and she was praying for him, and she told me, Jack, you gotta pray for. What was his first name? Langston was his last name. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You gotta pray for my husband. So I began praying for him. A few weeks later, I had a dream about him, and in the dream, he became a Christian. I told his wife, I mean, I am not one of those people, okay? I am from Boston, which is the real show-me state, okay? You gotta prove this to me. But I had a dream that he became a Christian. I told his wife, and she was so excited. A few months later, he came to the Christmas, gathering about Alpha, and I deliberately sat next to him, and talking to him. He was a big rock climber, so I know nothing about rock climbing. So, but I'm trying to make conversation like a good pastor does, and I'm thinking there's no way in heaven he's going to stick with this. Lo and behold, he shows up at Alpha, gives his life to Christ, and then led Alpha, became the director of it after the woman who had been leading it moved on. So I love Alpha, but you got to stick with it. You got to work it. Oh, and the other part about it is that there's leadership training in it. Everybody has to be trained every time. So I had to get trained every time we did it. I had to get trained again, but it was good because it reminds you of the philosophy of it. And it gets drilled into you. And out of that, some people then became group leaders. And people who had given their lives to Christ, they were eligible to become group leaders. You say, how can you do that? Well, you read the New Testament. Paul was preaching right as soon as he got his vision back. It happens. But it's supervised. You're not just throwing them to the wolves. There's a video that Nikki Gumbel, the teacher, gives, so that they're not going to treat Chelsea. And you coach them, and you look over their shoulder, and you pray for them. And then other people get served by getting involved. Somebody who doesn't come to Christ maybe, but they want to continue with it. They get to work with the meal and take part in that. And so everybody, they're being trained in leadership and responsibility. And there's prayer. You gather before the meeting, and the leaders get together a little bit early and they pray together. And that's when the devil starts to work, because he does not want this to happen. People will come together and they'll say, where's Joe? Oh, she had a car accident, or, kids are sick, or, okay, we'll have to figure out what to do, she's not here to lead our group. Where's the people with the meal? Oh, they're gonna be late. All kinds of things start to fall apart. And that's when you just have to say, Lord, this is spiritual warfare. We're not gonna be intimidated, all right? We're gonna work our way through this, we're gonna trust you for this. And then after the group left, the team would debrief and meet together and say, what happened in your group? Well, it was really, really a tough time. So-and-so said something really off the wall and upset someone else. And so you're dealing with that. But God is working in this thing. And all I can say is it's the best thing that I have seen and done. So anyway, and if you decide to do it, I would get trained. I would find a church somewhere, there's an Alpha website, find a church that is doing it. And if you could get there, physically, take a team, you assemble a team, take that team and you do the Alpha course. You guys did it at our church. And we did that with some other churches too. And we did it with the church. We went and tagged along and learned how to do this because again, you want to stick with the recipe. You can vary it a little bit, but you have to trust that that God is in this thing. And what can I say? It works. So we did a lot of discipleship that way. How you need a vehicle to do it. Obviously, it's about producing followers of Christ who love God, love others, and are making disciples themselves. All right, leadership. Want to talk about leadership? Blake and I know a pastor who was in a very small church, and he was forced out because he was, this was a small Baptist church, kind of a family-sized thing, maybe about 40 people at the most. And he wanted to move them into an elder system. They had probably what was like a council where there's the head of the deacons, the head of the trustees or whatever. And they met together, and I preached at this church twice, and I'm actually preaching at it again in November. And I don't know them well, but I talked to a lot of people there, and I knew the pastor. And I think he made the mistake of trying to impose an elder system on a church that basically was functioning as an eldership. I mean, they all knew each other. Some of them were related to each other. They worked together. They had figured out how to work together. Again, is that ideal? Maybe not, but it was working. And in my opinion, there was no need to, it was small enough that everyone could get together and make decisions. Is it a little awkward to have 40 people making decisions? Yeah, but it worked. And I think that was the case. I didn't hear his side of the story. I only got their side of the story. But in my way of thinking is he should have waited on that, should have kind of let, do you agree with that, Blake? He should have let things go as they were until maybe there comes a crisis point, or maybe the church grows, and I think it was growing, because I think he was a gospel preacher and loved the people. I guess he loved them. Yeah, I know he did. I don't want to judge him at all. He's a good man. But with the crisis came where 50 people, or now you get 40 of the old guard, you get 20 of these new people who have come in. Well, they're not part of the system. How do we make this work? I think that's when you say, all right, well, let's look at what the Bible says, and let's figure out how to function as an elder. You have elders here. Yep. And when you're in a congregational church, or in Baptist churches are obviously congregational as well, you have to go way back to early Puritan times to find elders. In the mid, from what I understand, my study of church history, it was in the early 1800s that congregational churches started doing away with elders because the congregational churches were morphing toward Presbyterianism because you had lifetime elders. Pastors came and went, so the elders accrued more and more power than the pastor, more power than the congregation, and so they were done away with. And my church was founded in 1846. It never had elders, but they did have an eldership, a de facto eldership. There was an executive board of the deacons that met together to kind of set the direction of the church with the pastor, and that I mean they were elders. And so I was actually at the church, I think 10 or 11 years before we moved to an eldership, and I tell this story in the book. And because the way we were governing ourselves was so awkward, it was so complicated, and I was a dog running between the different committees trying to get everybody on the same page, and it just became unworkable. So we reached a crisis, and that's when the time was right. Yes?
When you say that, did you view it as unworkable, or did everybody else recognize it was unworkable?
Excellent question. It's a long time ago. Ed, right?
Yeah.
A long time ago, Ed. I think people were recognizing it, and we had different little groups squabbling and that kind of thing, and so a guy who was a corporate guy, he said, Jack, in the corporate world, when you have to cut through bureaucracy, you do what's called a coordinating group. And so he said, let's form a coordinating group. Let's have the chairman of the deacons, chairman of the trustees, the treasurer, maybe the moderator, and you. Let's all meet and let's set the agenda for the committees. And we did. We would meet at breakfast time at someone's house. And that was like the proto eldership. And the time was right. We went to the elder board. And we did some things that I think have saved the church incredible heartache and divisiveness. We said we're going to limit it to 6 elders plus the pastor. The elders are not lifetime elders because elder is not a gift, it's not a spiritual gift. It's a calling, it's an office. And so, just like a pastor isn't a lifetime pastor, his office you guys may give him the boot. I think you should. I'm going to talk to you about this later. And so no lifetime, sort of a 3-year term. 6 of us. Pastor is by ex officio, by virtue of his office. He doesn't need to be elected. The pastor cannot be the chairman, but I would meet with the chairman and we would kind of set the agenda together and make sure we're on the same page with that. And we had to be in unanimity. And that is because Jesus Christ is the head of the church, we're his body. The head tells the body what to do, right? In the physical body and with Christ. The head is not going to tell one part of the body to do one thing and another part to do another thing. The head is not going to, most committee systems work on the basis of majority. What happens when you have a majority vote? You have winners and losers. The winners gloat and the losers have a second meeting out of the parking lot. And that's the beginning of dissension and the mess. When you're all together, and the elders are under the congregation, and the congregation is under Christ, when the elders are all together, it's like when the parents are on the same page, the kids can't divide them. But if the parents, we all know that. And so there's the worst that somebody who really had a legitimate beef, they could petition the church to review this, and that's legitimate. It's never happened. After we made that decision in 1991, how many years is it? 31 years. The church has not had a conflict. We've had times when there were squabbles within groups of the church, and the elders had to intervene and work, and sometimes it was successful, sometimes it wasn't. There were times when I had some conflict with maybe a staff person, but then I could go to the elders and say, we're having conflict here. And there was an instance where they actually had to intervene and kind of sort things out. But the church has not been divided in that time. And I attribute it to the fact that we operate on that principle of unanimity. Most of the time, just like with a couple, most of the time, 99.9% of the time, a couple can agree right away. But there are those times, there's been a handful of times in my life with my wife, where she said, I disagree with you, but I will defer to you. And I can only actually think of 2 instances where she said that. I will defer to you because you are the head. And so this is how it has worked. There was one instance where we could not agree for about 6 months. It was a very difficult issue involving a staff person. And one person held up that vote for 6 months. And I remember being angry at first because we know the right thing to do here. But as time went on, we realized, like the movie 12 Angry Men, have you ever seen that movie? Eventually, that one person persuaded the rest of us to take our time on this situation. We did eventually come to the same conclusion, but it was, in the meantime, a lot had happened and the church was really able to care for this individual. So I credit that unanimity principle with, and I think it's biblical, because Christ is, if he's speaking to us, we're either all going to hear him, or one is going to hear him and the 6 are not, and we're going to come over to that view, or the one is not, and they're going to eventually come. If we're all listening and we're praying and we're seeking, we're going to. It's based on trust. The committee system is based on mistrust and suspicion. I have to stake out my little turf, and I have to keep my budget. Don't you take my budget? I mean, we all, right? It's like government, and it's in government you want people beating each other up, right? God help us if they all got on the same page. Happened in Nazi Germany, I think. And but in the church, it's a family. That isn't healthy. So anyway, so there's a revitalization of leadership.
Can I ask you something?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
So during the COVID time,
Yep.
there were lots of decisions that we had to make for the church. But so we had a retreat, the elders had a retreat. And I would say that not all of us agreed on, but we came to the church with a united plan.
Amen.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. You didn't feel that this is a matter of absolute principle. If you did, you would have, stuck with it.
Right.
But obviously, so many things in the church are a matter of preference. I'd like this, but I'm not convinced that God wants us to do that. So yeah. No, that was good. And that, man, what a divisive time that was. And we know pastors that left the ministry during that time because it just got so divided. Just a couple other quick things, and then we'll be done. A renewal of leadership. We got the book on that. That's a good book. We found that our best staff, we did a lot of part-time and unpaid staff because we couldn't afford to pay people. But people were called to do something, like this woman that led Alpha. She led it for probably 20 years, was just incredible with it. We never paid her a dime. She didn't need the money. Her husband had a really good job. But I often said, gee, we should pay you, Roselle. But she said, no, I don't need that. And I think churches have people in them that want to be used according to how God has made them and fulfill them. We all want to be used by God. Every human being wants their life to count. They may not even believe in God, but they want something on their tombstone, other than nice try or something. And so that's built into us. And we get to tap into that desire and help people find their gift. And so use part-time, if you have to pay them if you need to. But in the meantime, what we would do is, like this woman, we sent her to Alpha conferences. I think down all over the place. She'd go to an Alpha conference to learn more, to gain more training and all of that. And so you honor people. We gave her a computer, a little office spot, and gave her a title. And she and her husband now are missionaries at Harvard University, working with international students. Yeah, and I like to think we taught her everything she knows, and probably not. But raise the people up. The only exceptions I would say, and you already solved this with Ed, But music gifts are so specialized, you might not be able to find an adequate music person from within, in which case you might have to go outside the system. But to the best you can, raise up people from within you. You know, that's organics, how God made it. You also need to think about membership and stewardship. And you know about membership. Stewardship, what I did, I learned early on not to see what people were giving. I made the mistake of sitting at the secretary's desk one time, and there on the desk was the pledge of someone who was very involved in the church, had a lot of authority, a lot of leadership, and I saw how little they were giving, and I was terribly disappointed in them. I never said anything, thank God, but I said, this isn't good. I have no idea what the real story is. For all I know, maybe they are struggling financially, maybe they give their money to missions. I haven't a clue. So after that, I said, I'm going to get out of that business entirely. And so and that gives you freedom. And I tell pastors that. I've heard pastors say, well, shepherd needs to know how his sheep are doing. Yeah, but you need to know that. And because you're going to judge them. I think I don't think you can help but judge people. And it gives you the freedom then to stand up and talk about money. Please chime in.
Just the opposite effect too. And when you really, if the pastor knows that there is a big giver, that will keep you from speaking into their life, saying hard things. What about if they
You
stop
too?
So, you know, it goes both ways.
Oh, it does. It does.
You don't want
Absolutely.
that as a pastor.
No, you don't. You don't. You don't want to know that stuff. And it gives you the freedom then to say, I don't know what, because they assume you know.
You do.
Yeah, we should say it often.
Say it often. I have no idea. I don't want to know. Because it's not about me and you. I'm doing you a favor. Actually, no. God's doing us a favor by letting us give to his cause. So that's why we're giving. We don't need your money. I would even say that. You know, we don't really need it. The church has been here for 170 years. Hasn't gone out of business yet. I don't think it's going to go out of business because you don't give. Why are you giving? You got to figure that out. You can't bribe them. You can't earn it. You know, he's going to take care of us. You give because you will grow. It's part of discipleship. So, and I teach tithing. I know people go back and forth on that. Is it Old Testament? Well, it's convenient. So, and actually, if you want to be New Testament, you got to give everything.
Yeah.
So,
That's what I say.
anyway. Any other comments? I think we're done. We can continue talking at lunch now.
Yeah.
I want to hear from some of you guys. What's happening?
Yeah, we'd like to share around the tables some
Yeah.
things that are going on in our ministry, but also interact with Jack while we have him.
Sure.
If you guys can stay for lunch, Jack. You're planning on staying for
Oh, I
lunch?
am. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
We just have to get back
Thank
by
you, Blake,
tomorrow
for
afternoon.
taking us.
Patriots, okay? That's,
Well, before 9:30 tomorrow.
oh, that's true too. I'll just leave this. Are we coming back up here?
I'll probably, we'll just talk. about the
Okay.
tables.
All right, I'll back up then.
Do you want to close us in prayer, Jack?
Sure, I sure do. Father, we thank you that you've